Dakota Johnson had spent months hiding behind quiet smiles, rehearsed interviews, and the kind of calm composure that Hollywood mistakes for strength. But when she finally sat down for the interview that would break the silence she had carried for far too long, her eyes told the truth before her voice did. They were tired, swollen from nights spent thinking instead of sleeping, and filled with a heaviness that no amount of makeup could conceal. As the cameras rolled, Dakota took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve, and for a moment she looked like someone debating whether to flee the room or tell the world everything she had kept locked away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost trembling, but clear. "I haven't talked about this before, but I think it's time." The interviewer didn't interrupt. They sensed that Dakota wasn't just recalling a breakup, she was reliving it. She explained that her relationship with Chris Martin had been one of the closest, most deeply rooted connections she had ever experienced. They were together for years, quietly and steadily, building something that felt safe to both of them in a world that rarely allowed either of them to feel safe. Dakota described how, in the beginning, Chris made her feel understood in a way no one else ever had. She laughed more freely around him. She felt grounded. They talked about building a future together, not necessarily in the spotlight, but in quiet corners of life where fame didn't reach. There were conversations about moving, about children someday, about living somewhere with more sky and fewer cameras. For Dakota, it felt like the first time love wasn't terrifying. It was peaceful. But then, almost unnoticeably at first, cracks began to appear. Dakota blamed their schedules, the constant distance between tour buses and film sets, the emotional exhaustion that came from juggling two high-pressure lives. She recalled nights when she fell asleep on opposite sides of the world from Chris, waiting for a text that didn't come until morning. Weeks when they barely saw each other except through screens. At first, they both fought the distance, sending long messages, scheduling trips, promising to make more time. But as time passed, those promises grew harder to keep. "We started living separate lives without even noticing," Dakota admitted, staring at the floor as if the memory itself still stung. "We weren't drifting because we wanted to, we were drifting because life kept pulling us apart." Things became worse when the tabloids began spinning their own stories about the relationship. Rumors about Chris growing closer to other people while on tour, whispers that Dakota had become too busy for him, speculation that neither of them could shut down fast enough. "We never wanted our relationship to become entertainment," she said, her voice tightening. "But once the lies started, it felt like we lost control of our own story." The interviewer asked whether any of the rumors were true, and Dakota shook her head slowly, pausing long before answering. "What hurt wasn't that people lied," she said quietly. "What hurt was that we started doubting ourselves because of those lies." Then came the night she still couldn't talk about without her voice cracking. She described the moment Chris told her they needed to take a break, even though she knew, deep down, that breaks rarely lead back to togetherness. She remembered the exact way he looked at her, with sorrow but a kind of finality that made her stomach twist. "It felt like my heart broke while I was still trying to breathe," Dakota whispered. "I felt like I was losing my best friend, not just my boyfriend." They sat across from each other in her living room, both crying in their own quiet ways. She tried to argue that they could fix things, that they had been through worse, that love should be enough. But Chris had made up his mind. "I don't want us to hurt each other anymore," he told her. Dakota admitted that she didn't understand what he meant at the time. She only knew that everything inside her was collapsing, and she couldn't stop it. After the breakup, Dakota kept silent, not because she didn't care, but because caring hurt too much. She threw herself into work, but even on set, people noticed the change. She became quieter, fragile, distracted. Friends said she seemed like someone grieving something she couldn't talk about. "It was too painful to say out loud," she confessed. "If I said it, it became real. And I wasn't ready for real." She revealed that she avoided interviews, events, and anything that forced her to answer questions she didn't have the emotional strength for. Even hearing Chris's name sent a sharp ache through her chest that she didn't know how to hide. Her voice trembled again as she approached the part she had avoided the longest. "There's something I never told anyone," she said, lifting her eyes, their glassiness revealing the storm she'd been carrying. The interviewer held their breath. Dakota continued, "What hurt me the most wasn't the breakup itself, it was what happened that night. Something he said, something I still can't forget." She didn't say it yet. But it was clear that Dakota Johnson was finally ready to reveal the truth she had buried deep enough to almost forget, yet painful enough that she never truly could. Dakota took a long pause before speaking again, and for a moment the entire set seemed to hold its breath. She looked down at her hands, twisting the ring on her finger, as if touching something familiar might steady her enough to continue. When she finally lifted her eyes, they carried a softness mixed with hurt, an expression of someone about to reveal a truth she had guarded too closely for too long. "What happened that night, it changed everything," she said quietly, almost as if she feared the weight of her own words. She explained that after Chris told her they needed a break, they didn't immediately say goodbye. They sat together for hours, surrounded by the dim glow of her living room lamps, trying to make sense of something neither of them wanted to face. "There were so many silences," Dakota said, voice trembling. "Not angry silences, but the kind that feel like your whole world is folding in on itself." She described how Chris seemed torn, conflicted, as though he desperately wanted to stay yet felt obligated to leave. Dakota remembered watching him struggle to look at her, his hands shaking slightly, his breathing uneven. She knew he wasn't being cruel, he was hurting, too. But that didn't make the moment any less devastating. Then came the sentence that had followed her for months, the one she said replayed in her mind long after he walked out the door. "He told me," she whispered, "that I was beginning to outgrow him, and that staying together would only hold me back." Dakota's voice cracked at the memory. "He said that if we kept going, I would lose parts of myself trying to carry him." She blinked, her lashes wet. "I didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken. It felt like he was breaking up with me for my own good, and somehow that hurt even more." The interviewer leaned forward gently, sensing the gravity of her confession. Dakota admitted that she hated him in that moment, not because of the breakup, but because he made her feel guilty for loving him. "I begged him not to say things like that," she recalled. "Because it made me feel like I was choosing myself over him, and I wasn't. I was choosing us." She swallowed hard, her voice growing softer. But he had already chosen the ending. After he left, Dakota said she collapsed onto the couch and cried harder than she had ever cried in her life. She cried until her chest ached, until she felt numb, until she couldn't tell where her grief ended and the shock began. She didn't sleep that night. She just sat there, replaying his words again and again, wondering if the man she loved truly believed he was doing her a favor by leaving. The days that followed were even worse. Dakota described how she tried to return to set the next morning, only to break down in her trailer before filming began. She canceled interviews, avoided calls, and shut out most of her friends. "I felt like my life had cracked open," she said, "and everything inside me was spilling out faster than I could catch it." She admitted that for a while she blamed herself, convinced she wasn't enough, too busy, too emotional, too independent, too something. But with time, she realized that heartbreak rarely has a single cause. "We both contributed to the distance," she said. "We both let silence replace communication. And by the time we realized it, the damage was already done." The part that hurt most came weeks later, when rumors about Chris and Sophie Turner began circulating. Dakota said she didn't want to believe them at first, but the images online, the whispers from insiders, and the sudden shift in Chris's energy made it impossible to ignore. "It was like being replaced before I had even understood why we ended," she said, looking away. "It made me question everything, whether he had already moved on, whether our relationship had meant as much to him as it did to me, or whether I had missed warning signs because I was too in love to see clearly." She admitted that hearing about his engagement months later reopened wounds she had worked so hard to heal. "It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't bitterness. It was grief resurfacing in its rawest form. It felt like he closed a chapter I was still trying to read," she said, her voice barely audible. Then, almost as if she regretted the vulnerability of her own honesty, Dakota breathed slowly and added, "But I don't hate him. I never have." She explained that despite everything, the heartbreak, the silence, the painful timing, she still believed that Chris loved her in his own way. "People grow," she said. "Sometimes in different directions. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them." She admitted that she had spent months learning how to let go, how to redefine herself without the relationship that once felt like a home. Just as the interview was wrapping up, Dakota revealed one final truth, a detail she had avoided since the breakup. "He reached out to me a few weeks ago," she said, surprising even the interviewer. She didn't read the message word for word, but she hinted that it wasn't an apology, nor was it closure. "It felt like a door opening," she whispered. "But I don't know yet whether it's a door I'm supposed to walk through." Her final sentence hung in the air like a bittersweet echo. Some love stories don't end, they just change. And with that, Dakota Johnson finally let the world see the pain she had kept hidden for far too long.